Hello everyone, welcome to Back Scripture Horror. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Atlanta winters never get truly cold, but that New Year's Eve carried a sharp bite that made everyone sprint from their cars into the warmth of the house. I had driven down from Nashville that morning, hours on the highway with nothing but coffee and podcasts to keep me awake, chasing an invitation my friend Brienne had given me months earlier. She lived in a sprawling old Victorian near Grant Park, the kind of place with wraparound porches, too many rooms to count, and a basement someone had turned into a game room with a pool table and retro arcade cabinets. After working remotely as a data analyst for so long, barely seeing anyone face to face, the idea of a legendary New Year's party felt like oxygen. I arrived around 6 in the evening, and the house already buzzed with preparation. People hung lights along the porch railing, someone tested a DJ booth in the living room, and coolers lined the hallway like they were awaiting inspection. By 9, the place was packed with at least 50 people, maybe more. Brienne had invited her yoga studio, her roommates brought friends, and those people brought their own circles until no one could tell who belonged to whom. The energy felt warm, alive, a kind of shared anticipation that made the cold outside irrelevant. I planted myself near the kitchen island, drinking whiskey and talking to a guy named Jerome, who worked in urban planning and had a laugh so infectious people drifted toward it without realizing. Music pulsed through the floorboards, crowds weaved through rooms, and people introduced themselves with that rare, soft openness that only exists during countdown nights when everyone silently agrees to hope for better things. For the first time in months, I felt present, like maybe driving 4 hours had been the best decision I'd made in a long time. The house felt almost alive from all that body heat and excitement, windows fogging from inside warmth meeting the winter air outside. I didn't know then that in less than 2 hours, I'd be face down on that same kitchen floor with a gun pressed against my skull. It was around 11 when I noticed a group I hadn't seen earlier. 4 men and 2 women, late 20s or early 30s, dressed just nicely enough to camouflage themselves in the crowd, but with a stiffness in their posture that didn't match the looseness of the party. One man wore a fitted black jacket, head shaved, a geometric tattoo snaking up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. He kept scanning the room with sharp, efficient sweeps of his eyes, like cataloging exits and obstacles. His group split up systematically. 2 drifted toward the basement stairs, 2 disappeared down the hallway toward the bedrooms, and the remaining pair lingered near the front door. At the time, exhausted from travel and 2 whiskeys deep, I told myself they were just new arrivals exploring the house. It's only now that I can see how deliberately they placed themselves. The countdown started at 11:59. Everyone swarmed into the living room, raising plastic cups and champagne glasses high. Brienne climbed onto a chair near the DJ booth, flushed and beaming, shouting the numbers as they fell. I got squeezed between Jerome, now holding a bottle of cheap Prosecco, and a woman named Valerie, who kept adjusting a glittery tiara that slid sideways each time someone bumped her shoulder. The room vibrated with collective voices shouting in sync, and when we hit 0, confetti blasted from somewhere overhead, and people screamed, kissed, hugged strangers, and toasted to new beginnings. I hugged Jerome, then Valerie, then someone I didn't even know who smelled like peppermint schnapps. For the first time in a long time, champagne actually tasted like possibility. Somewhere in that burst of celebration, those 6 strangers locked the back door and pulled weapons from under their jackets. The first scream came from the basement around 12,004, but most people thought it was just someone celebrating too hard. Music still played, conversations kept flowing, and I wandered into the kitchen for water because the whiskey was starting to blur my edges. That's when the man with the neck tattoo walked in holding a pistol. One of the women followed, cradling a sawed-off shotgun against her hip. He didn't yell or try to shock anyone into silence. He simply pointed the gun at me and said, in a calm, rehearsed voice, "Get on the floor, face down, hands behind your head." My body reacted faster than my thoughts. I dropped so hard my knees cracked the tile. Within seconds, 3 more people were forced down beside me. A girl in a sequin dress was quietly sobbing. 2 men kept whispering, asking what was going on, like any of us knew. The woman with the shotgun blocked the doorway while her partner zip-tied our wrists so tightly I felt my pulse throbbing inside my fingertips. Real screaming erupted after that, shrieks that ricocheted through hallways and staircases, layered with pounding footsteps and crashing furniture. From the floor, cheek pressed to cold tile that smelled faintly of spilled beer, all I could see were boots moving in frantic patterns. Glass shattered somewhere above us. Someone yelled to shut up, get down, hand it over. The man with the tattoo crouched beside me and pressed the cold barrel of his gun to the base of my skull. He demanded to know where the safe was. I told him I didn't live here, had no idea about any safe. He pushed harder, metal grinding into my scalp. His breath smelled like cigarettes and Brienne's homemade rum punch. The thought of her hit me with sudden terror. I didn't know where she was or if she'd been caught in the chaos. Maybe he saw something shift in my expression because he chuckled, a low, humorless sound, and told me not to worry about my friends. He said I should worry about myself, about giving them what they wanted so everyone could keep their fingers. That detail made something deep inside me freeze. They moved with efficiency and purpose. The woman with the shotgun dumped purses, wallets, phones, jewelry, and even a laptop into a black duffel bag. Others searched bedrooms and the basement. In less than 15 minutes, they herded nearly everyone into the main living room, forcing us to sit against the walls while 2 armed guards watched. The DJ booth lay overturned, confetti mixed with broken glass, and people shifted gingerly to keep shards from cutting into their legs. I spotted Brienne across the room, mascara streaked down her face, a bruise rising on her cheek. Our eyes met briefly. She mouthed something, maybe, "Are you okay?" But I could only nod. Jerome sat nearby, drained of all color, hands trembling despite being clasped tightly in his lap. One woman refused to surrender her engagement ring, her grandmother's, and was pistol-whipped so brutally she collapsed into the person beside her. Someone vomited on the floor. The room was cracking under the weight of terror. A guy named Dennis had hidden in the basement bathroom and managed to call 911, whispering the address into the phone with his brightness turned all the way down. But it was New Year's Eve in Atlanta. Dispatch told him help was coming, but there were delays everywhere. He stayed on the line until one of the robbers kicked down the bathroom door and dragged him upstairs. They beat him in front of all of us until his face was an unrecognizable mess of swelling and blood. The message was unmistakable, no more heroes. The leader began pacing anxiously, checking a silver watch he had likely stolen minutes earlier. They had expected to be in and out quickly, but the number of people had slowed them down. The room's energy had shifted into something unstable, dozens of terrified people calculating whether compliance would actually keep them alive. Even the woman holding the shotgun looked uneasy now, her grip tightening like she expected someone to rush her. The siren started at 12,041, first distant, then swelling around the house in every direction. I watched the leader's face fracture calm professionalism collapsing into raw fury. He screamed for his crew to grab what they could. For a moment, I truly believed they were going to start shooting to eliminate witnesses. Instead, he reached for Brienne, yanking her up by the hair. He shouted that they were taking insurance. 2 others grabbed Valerie, her sparkly tiara crooked and blood-stained, and an unfamiliar man. I shouted Brienne's name until my throat tore, but she only managed one terrified look back before disappearing through the kitchen doorway. The robbers retreated, guns raised until the last possible second, then vanished into the cold night. Police found the 3 hostages 4 hours later in a stolen catering van behind a strip mall 8 miles away. Brienne was physically unharmed, but didn't speak for days. Dennis survived but needed reconstructive surgery. The woman with the engagement ring suffered a fractured skull. 2 of the 6 robbers were arrested weeks later trying to pawn jewelry in Savannah. The others, especially the one with the neck tattoo, vanished. I drove back to Nashville 2 days later, wrists bruised purple from the zip ties, and didn't leave my apartment for nearly a month. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that kitchen floor, cold metal against my skull, hearing Brienne scream as they dragged her away. It's been almost a year now. I still flinch at fireworks. Still avoid parties. People say time heals everything, but I don't think that's true. Some things don't heal. They settle into you bone deep, and you learn to carry them because stopping means never moving again. My girlfriend Nicole and I had been together almost 3 years when New Year's Eve rolled around, and neither of us had the energy for downtown Boise crowds or loud bars stuffed with people forcing themselves to be cheerful. We lived in a small apartment, both working jobs that drained us more than they paid us. She was a veterinary technician at a clinic by the mall, constantly dealing with emergencies and sick animals that broke her heart more often than not. I worked IT support for a regional insurance company, the kind of job where you end each day feeling like you've been scraped hollow by people demanding problems be fixed that weren't fixable. December had been brutal, so when she suggested finding a quiet place to watch the fireworks alone, just us, no noise, no chaos, it sounded like the perfect way to actually breathe. I knew about a spot called Ridgeline Point about 30 minutes outside the city. A coworker once told me he used to take his wife there when they were dating. It was a small overlook at the end of a winding mountain road where the whole valley opened up beneath you, a view that made Boise look like a handful of scattered lights dropped across the dark. It felt private, safe, or at least I thought it would. The drive up was calm in that winter night way where the world feels muffled. Just the hum of my old Ford Ranger, snow-dusted pines bending toward the road, and a soft acoustic playlist Nicole had made for nights exactly like this. We passed the last gas station around 11, and from there the world narrowed into a ribbon of asphalt cutting through black trees. The temperature outside had dropped to around 15 degrees, frost clinging to the windshield edges, the windows getting colder by the minute. When we finally pulled into the Overlook's gravel lot, we were completely alone. Not another car, not another set of footprints. The city lights glowed far below us, and above the horizon the stars were so sharp and bright they looked like they were cutting into the sky. Nicole squeezed my hand and whispered that this was exactly what she needed. I believed her. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt like something out of the kind of life we kept promising we'd build together. Quiet, warm, close. We shared hot chocolate from the thermos, wrapped a blanket over our legs, cracked 2 hand warmers, and tucked them inside our gloves. We talked about the year behind us, about the apartment we hoped to move into in spring, about her sister's upcoming wedding in Portland, and whether we could afford the trip. The truck windows fogged slowly, our breath turning the cab into a warm, dim cocoon. Every few minutes, I wiped a little circle on a glass so I could check the time and the view below. It was peaceful, simple, and for the first time all month, I felt something close to rested. Then I noticed a small, pale light off to the left, just at the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe a glint off ice or a distant car. But then it moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to make me blink and lean forward. Nicole stopped mid-sentence when she saw my expression and asked what was wrong. I told her I probably saw a reflection or maybe an animal with a collar light. She leaned toward the window and looked. The light disappeared. We sat there for a moment, quiet, both scanning the dark forest edge. Nicole gave a nervous little laugh and said it was probably just a hiker with a headlamp. It was New Year's Eve. People did weird things all the time. I tried to accept that explanation, but something about the way the light had moved, slow, intentional, made the back of my neck tighten. I told myself I was overthinking. Too much true crime, too many nights staying up late watching videos that made every shadow feel meaningful. I kissed Nicole's forehead, told her it was nothing, but I kept glancing toward the trees. 10 minutes later, I saw it again. Closer this time. Not far, maybe 20 feet from the spot it had been before. And now it stayed on long enough for me to understand what it actually was. The glow of a cell phone screen, held low to the chest, lighting up the bottom half of a face. Someone was standing at the edge of the woods watching us. Nicole's nails dug into my sleeve as she stared at the same point I was. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, didn't even shift its weight, just stood there, maybe 30 yards away, half concealed behind a thick pine. I could make out a bulky jacket, broad shoulders, but the phone screen clicked off before I could see more. My heartbeat thudded in my throat. Nicole whispered that we needed to leave immediately. I agreed. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine cough stuttered and died. I tried again. Nothing. Dashboard lights flickered weakly for a moment, then went dark. Nicole's voice cracked as she asked what was happening, and I didn't have an answer. The truck had been fine all day. The battery was practically new. But now, it was dead. Utterly dead. Like something had cut the power entirely. I tried again and again until the only sound was the hollow click of a powerless starter. Nicole's breathing grew fast, almost panicked. She pointed at the tree line. The figure had moved. He was no longer near the trees. He was standing in the middle of the gravel lot now, maybe 20 feet from our front bumper. No phone light this time. Just a silhouette against the faint city glow. Nicole's hands shook as she tried to unlock her phone. She dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I tried mine. Same result. Too far up the mountain for cell towers. The figure still didn't move. Didn't speak. There was something terrifying about the stillness. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Nicole started crying quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. I held her shoulder, trying to keep her calm even though my own chest felt hollow. Then the man took a slow, deliberate step forward. I slammed my hand on the horn instinctively, but it was dead too. Whatever had killed the battery had killed everything electrical. Nicole screamed at me to do something. I reached under my seat and found a tire iron I'd forgotten was there. Not much, but better than nothing. I told her that if he came closer, I'd get out and fight. She grabbed the thermos like a weapon, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The man was maybe 15 feet away when headlights swept across the lot. He froze just long enough for me to see him clearly. Pale skin, sunken cheeks, hollow eyes that reflected the light unnaturally. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, but something about him felt impossibly worn down. He turned calmly and walked back into the trees as the headlights grew brighter. A Jeep Wrangler pulled up beside us. The driver, a woman with short gray hair, asked if we were okay. She said she saw someone walking away from our truck and wanted to make sure we weren't in trouble. The relief I felt was overwhelming. We told her what happened, and her expression sharpened instantly. She told us to get in her Jeep. Nicole didn't hesitate. As soon as we were inside, the woman, Connie, locked the doors and drove us down the mountain without looking back for long. But she kept checking her mirrors like she expected to see someone behind us. At the gas station, under bright fluorescent lights, we called the police. 2 officers arrived within minutes and took our statements. They sent a patrol car to check the overlook and asked if I wanted a tow arranged. I said yes. I wasn't going back up there alone. Around 3 in the morning, the tow truck driver, a big guy named S, let me ride with him back up to the overlook. When he popped the hood of my Ranger, he paused, then waved me over. Both battery cables had been cut clean through. Not frayed, not torn. Cut, deliberate. Sharp. Whoever that man was, he had walked right up to our truck while we sat inside talking about our future and sliced our only way out. The police never found him. They searched the area, found an abandoned campsite deep in the trees. Canned food, a sleeping bag used for months, a duffel bag with duct tape, zip ties, and a hunting knife. But no ID, no prints, nothing. Nicole and I moved to Portland a few months later. We sold the Ranger. Bought a car with alarms and working locks. We never went back to Ridgeline Point. Some nights, long after midnight, I still see the man standing at the edge of the trees, motionless, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Like he was waiting for headlights that never should have come when they did. New Year's Eve is something I still think about almost every single day. I had moved into my apartment complex in Atlanta about 6 months before, one of those massive cookie-cutter places where every floor looks identical and every door is painted the same shade of lifeless gray. My unit was 4B, 4th floor, second door on the left after stepping out of the elevator. I knew the layout by heart. At least I thought I did. That night, my coworkers from the warehouse invited me to a party in Midtown, and since I had no real plans and my family was back in Virginia, I figured why not. I took an Uber around 10, already a little buzzed from a few beers I'd had while getting ready. The party was packed, music shaking the floor, alcohol flowing like nobody cared what tomorrow looked like. By midnight, I was drunk enough that my reflection in the window felt like it belonged to someone else. Somewhere between cheering, hugs, and another round of whiskey I didn't need, I lost track of my limit. I left the party around 2, maybe closer to 3. My phone was nearly dead, 5% at best, just enough to request an Uber. I barely remember getting into the car, just flashes of street lights and the murmur of the driver asking if we'd reached the right complex. I said yes without actually checking. All I wanted was my bed. My legs felt heavy, my thoughts cotton soft, and when the Uber rolled away, I staggered into the building I believed was mine. The lobby looked exactly right. Same tiled floors, same mailboxes, same cheap elevator with scratched metal doors. Nothing felt wrong. I pressed the button for the 4th floor and leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, willing the world to stop spinning. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out, turned left like I always do, and walked down the hallway counting the doors automatically. I stopped at the familiar spot, at what I knew was 4B. I pulled down my key and shoved it into the lock. It didn't turn. I was too drunk to process that as anything more than clumsy coordination, so I tried again. The metal scraped, my hand slipped, and then, somehow, I heard a click. The door nudged open. In my foggy state, I didn't question it for a second. I walked inside, kicked my shoes off, and let the darkness swallow me. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not mine. My place always smelled like cheap dollar store air freshener, fake ocean breeze masking the scent of leftover takeout. This one smelled like cigarettes and something greasy, maybe old frying oil soaked deep into the walls. But I was too far gone to care. The layout was identical to mine. The tiny entryway, the living room straight ahead, kitchen to the right, hallway to the bedrooms on the left. I'd walked these steps 100 times. My brain didn't see anything wrong. I bumped my shin on a coffee table that shouldn't have been there, cursed under my breath, and kept going. Halfway down the hallway, I heard movement. A low shuffle. A door opening. I froze, not out of fear but confusion. I lived alone. There should have been no one else inside. Before I could shape a thought, a light flicked on, and suddenly I was staring at a man I had never seen in my life. He was older, maybe mid-40s, standing in boxer shorts and a white tank top, gripping a baseball bat with both hands raised high like he was ready to swing for my skull. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, frantic. He yelled something at me, words I couldn't fully understand through the alcohol buzzing in my ears. Something about getting out. Who was I? What was I doing in his home? That was the moment reality finally slammed into me. I wasn't in my apartment at all. I was inside the wrong unit. Inside a stranger's home in the middle of the night. And he thought I was there to hurt him. I threw my hands up immediately, babbling apologies, trying to explain that I lived in 4B, that I made a mistake, that I thought this was my apartment. But the words came out slurred and useless, stumbling over each other like they were drunk too. He didn't listen. He advanced on me, shaking with adrenaline. The bat lifted like he was deciding whether to end me right there. Behind him, a woman appeared, probably his wife. She screamed at him to call the police, demanded to know who I was, what I wanted, why I was in their home. The hallway filled with noise, yelling layered over yelling, my head throbbing with panic. I backed up instinctively, my heel catching on something, maybe a shoe, maybe a rug, and I stumbled. That tiny slip was all it took. He swung. I twisted, purely on instinct, and the bat slammed into my left shoulder instead of my skull. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and electric. I crashed to the floor, my face hitting hard enough to taste blood. My thoughts scattered like broken glass. I curled up, clutching my shoulder, crying out in pain, trying desperately to make him understand it was a mistake. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't anything but an idiot who walked into the wrong building. He stood over me, chest heaving, the bat raised for another swing. I remember looking up at him, seeing that strange mix of terror and rage in his eyes, the kind that only appears when someone is convinced their life is on the line. I genuinely thought those next seconds would be my last. His wife saved me. She grabbed his arm, yelling at him to stop, insisting she had already called 911, begging him to wait. He hesitated, breath trembling, the bat lowering a fraction. I stayed frozen, still apologizing, still crying, the pain in my shoulder making it impossible to think straight. The minutes dragged on like hours. No one said anything. We all just waited in this awful silence filled with fear and confusion. Then I heard sirens approaching. The arrival of the police brought a new kind of dread. Relief too, because at least the man wouldn't kill me, but dread, because I had no idea how I was going to explain any of this. To them, I was a drunk intruder who forced his way into a stranger's home. When the officers burst in with guns drawn, shouting commands, I stayed on the floor with my hands visible, doing exactly what I'd seen in every cautionary news story. They cuffed me, which sent another wave of pain through my shoulder, and began questioning everyone. The couple explained what happened, waking up to a stranger inside their apartment, thinking I was a burglar. I tried to tell my side, but my words were still thick and clumsy. One of the officers checked my wallet, saw my ID, then asked me for my address. When I told him, he stared at me like he couldn't decide whether I was lying or unbelievably stupid. Finally, he said something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't in Building B. I was in Building C. All 4 buildings in the complex looked identical. Same design, same layout, same numbering. The Uber driver had dropped me at the wrong entrance, and I was too drunk to notice. I walked into Building C, took the elevator to the 4th floor, found Unit 4B, and tried the door. The woman's face went pale when the officer asked if they had locked it. They had come home drunk themselves and forgotten the deadbolt. One tiny oversight. One unlocked door. The man, whose name I learned was Gregory, eventually sat on the couch with his face in his hands, shaking. His wife, Marlene, hovered close by, still rattled. The paramedics confirmed my shoulder wasn't broken, just badly bruised. The police took statements, and I apologized over and over, feeling smaller every time the words left my mouth. Eventually, Gregory walked over to me, eyes red and exhausted. He said he was sorry for hitting me. I told him I understood. If I had woken to a stranger in my home, I probably would have done the same. The police didn't charge me. Gregory didn't want to press charges. Marlene even offered to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I just wanted to leave. One of the officers walked me outside and pointed to the building I actually lived in, my real Building B, only about 50 feet away. 50 feet between normal life and catastrophe. I walked to my apartment in a daze, shoulder throbbing, blood drying on my lip. I stood outside my own door for a long time, staring at the number 4B, thinking how easily things could have gone differently. If Gregory had swung harder, if he'd aimed higher, if they'd had a gun instead of a bat, I might never have seen another sunrise. It wasn't supernatural or cinematic, just life random, cruel, indifferent. A chain of small mistakes that almost cost me everything. And that's what stays with me the most. There was no villain, no monster. Just 2 drunk people, 4 identical buildings, and 1 unlocked door that should have stayed closed. If someone had told me that my first morning of 2024 would involve barricading myself in a bathroom while a stranger paced outside my door, I would have laughed in their face. But that's exactly where the night led, and the worst part is how normal everything felt at the beginning. I had graduated the previous spring and finally landed my first real job at an insurance company downtown. For the first time in my life, I was earning enough to split the rent on a decent 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Tricia. We thought we were starting the new year on the right foot. We had no idea how wrong that assumption would turn out to be. Earlier that evening, we'd gone to a huge house party thrown by a coworker named Jerome. One of those chaotic, overcrowded events where the music is too loud, strangers drift in and out of rooms, and time passes without you noticing. When I checked my phone and saw it was nearly 3 in the morning, the place had already started thinning out, and Jerome was giving tired hints that he wanted everyone to leave. A smaller group of us decided to keep the celebration going at our apartment, just a low-key continuation of the night. It sounded harmless at the time. It was me, Tricia, our friends Andy and Simone, and, though I didn't realize it yet, the problem. Andy mentioned he'd run into some guy named Wallace at the party, someone he vaguely remembered from a flag football league that broke apart 2 years earlier. Somehow, without any of us agreeing to it, Wallace got into our rideshare with us, half-empty whiskey bottle in hand, smiling like he belonged there. I still don't fully understand how he attached himself to the group so easily, but suddenly he was stepping into our apartment, blinking at the lights like he was memorizing the layout. He was tall, maybe 6'3", shaved head, pale gray eyes that didn't blink enough. The first thing he said wasn't hi or Happy New Year, but a comment about how our apartment smelled like vanilla and cinnamon and how it reminded him of his grandmother's house before she died. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. As if the memory wasn't nostalgic, but something he was replaying for the wrong reasons. Tricia shot me a look the moment he turned away. I pretended not to notice, because none of us wanted to admit the same thought. We didn't know this man, and something about him was off. For the first hour, the worst thing about him was that he was socially awkward. Too loud when nobody was telling a joke. Abrupt facts that didn't connect to anything. A drink that he kept refilling without being offered. His stories contradicted themselves. Pharmaceutical sales, between jobs, a lawsuit. But we were tired, tipsy, and willing to overlook it. What bothered me wasn't his words, but the way he moved. He acted like the place was his, opening our fridge without asking, commenting on our leftovers, picking up framed photos and staring at them as if he expected them to reveal secrets. At one point, he wandered down the hallway toward our bedrooms, and I had to tell him the bathroom was the other direction. He didn't apologize, just smiled, flat and empty, like he didn't care that he'd been caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. By 4 a.m, Simone had passed out on the love seat and Andy was fading fast on the floor. Trisha and I exchanged glances across the room, silent agreement that this needed to end. I got up, stretched, and exaggerated a yawn, hoping Wallace would take the hint. Instead, he sank deeper into the armchair, kicked off his shoes, and made himself comfortable. His socks didn't match, one black, one green, and his feet smelled like they hadn't touched soap in days. I mentioned that it was getting late, that we all had to be up in the morning. He nodded slowly without lifting his eyes from the blank TV screen, saying he wasn't tired, that he was a night owl, that he would just hang out for a while longer. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Trisha stepped in, firm but polite, telling him it was time for everyone to head out. Andy mumbled that he might crash on the couch, which was fine. Andy was practically family. But Wallace didn't move. He said he didn't have anywhere to go, claimed his roommate had changed the locks, and he couldn't get inside until morning. The story sounded rehearsed, too smooth, too practiced. Trisha asked whether he had any friends nearby. Any family. He shook his head slowly, but the look on his face wasn't sad. It was knowing. As if he already understood we weren't going to win this fight. He said he'd sleep in the chair and we wouldn't even know he was there. His voice softened, almost gentle, and that scared me more than anger would have. Trisha and I retreated to the kitchen, whispering. Calling the police felt extreme. Waking Andy would make things messier. We considered going to our rooms and locking our doors until morning. It felt like the least dangerous option. When we walked back into the living room to say goodnight, Wallace wasn't in the armchair anymore. He was standing in the hallway to our bedrooms, perfectly still, facing the closed doors like he was listening through them. I asked what he was doing, trying to sound calm. He turned his head slowly, his face blank for a moment, then he forced a smile. Said he was just looking for the bathroom again. The bathroom door was open. He had walked past it to get where he was standing. Trisha pointed him back toward it and told him to stay in the living room the rest of the night. He raised his hands in mock surrender and brushed past us deliberately, close enough that I smelled something sour beneath the whiskey, like sweat and metal. We went to Trisha's room because hers had a lock and mine didn't. She pushed the dresser against the door. We sat on her bed, phones in hand, wide awake. From the other side of the door we heard Wallace moving, floorboards creaking, cabinets opening, the refrigerator door, footsteps down the hallway. We heard him try the handle of the bathroom door. Then my bedroom door. Soft clicks followed by silence. My heart felt lodged in my throat. Around 6 a.m, the noises stopped. The apartment went so silent it felt staged. Trisha and I whispered about whether he'd fallen asleep or was just standing still somewhere. At some point we must have drifted off. I woke to gray light and voices in the living room. It was almost 8. Andy was talking groggily, asking where his jacket was. Wallace's calm voice replied that he'd moved it because it was blocking the heater. He spoke like he lived there. Trisha and I opened the door slowly. Wallace was sitting at our dining table eating cereal from our cabinet with our milk while scrolling through his phone. Simone sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, purse clutched in both hands. Andy stood by the window, awake enough now to recognize that something had gone very wrong. I walked to the front door, opened it, and told Wallace it was time to leave. He stared at me as he chewed, then asked where I expected him to go. Andy stepped forward, voice firm, telling him to get out. Wallace looked between us, something calculating flickering behind his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he stood up slowly, wiped his mouth on the back of his hand, and walked toward the door. As he passed me, he leaned close enough that I felt his breath on my cheek. He whispered that he had a really nice time, and that maybe he'd see me around. I slammed the door behind him. The wall shook. Trisha locked both the deadbolt and chain, and I stood there breathing hard, adrenaline still buzzing through my limbs. Simone left immediately. Andy apologized over and over, swearing he barely knew Wallace. Tricia and I spent the rest of the day cleaning every surface he had touched. In my bedroom, drawers had been opened, a jewelry box moved. Nothing taken, but the violation was enough. We changed the locks the next day. I never saw Wallace again. But months later, whenever I see a tall man with a shaved head, my chest tightens before I can stop it. The lesson of that night has never left me. Trust your instincts when someone makes you uncomfortable, because the cost of being polite can be terrifyingly high. Colin showed up at my place around 10 with 2 bottles of cheap champagne and his girlfriend Whitney, who was carrying a stack of frozen pizzas like she was presenting some kind of offering. Nothing wild, just the 4 of us total. The 3 of them, plus my neighbor from 2 doors down, Frank, who had separated from his wife a couple months earlier and needed somewhere to be that night. My place is a small ranch-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Quiet street, older couples, young families, the sort of neighborhood where people wave out of politeness but rarely talk long enough to learn anything meaningful about one another. We had the music at a reasonable volume, maybe a little louder during certain songs, but nothing that would push a neighbor to anger. I had hosted this exact kind of small gathering the year before without a single complaint, and my closest neighbor was Frank, who was literally sitting on my couch eating pepperoni slices off the paper plate. Whitney had just come back from the kitchen with another round of beers when we heard it. 3 firm, steady knocks on the front door, the kind of knock that shuts down every conversation. I remember glancing at my phone, 11:52 p.m. I was seconds away from texting my mom a Happy New Year, since she always went to bed early. Colin muted the speaker, and the room went still. Frank joked that it was the cops, and we all laughed because it seemed ridiculous, the empty kind of laughter people use when they're mildly uneasy but don't want to admit it. I walked to the door, not thinking much of anything, but the second I reached for the handle, something in my gut tightened. Through the small window beside the door, I saw a man standing on my porch. Mid-30s maybe, dark jacket, jeans, hands clasped in front of him like he'd been waiting a long time. I opened the door only halfway, leaving the chain hooked, more out of instinct than caution. He smiled when our eyes met and said he was responding to a noise complaint from one of my neighbors. Anonymous, he said. Not allowed to share that information, he said. His voice had this strange calmness to it, like he'd rehearsed each word in advance. He wasn't wearing a badge, no uniform. Nothing official. When I asked if he was a cop, he hesitated for just a split second, just long enough for the truth to slip through before he said he was with the neighborhood association. That made no sense. I'd lived there nearly 7 years. There was no HOA, no community board. Nothing. I told him we'd keep it down and began closing the door. He placed his hand on the frame, not aggressively, just firmly enough to stop the door. He said he needed to come inside to verify the noise level. Standard procedure, he claimed. That was when Colin stepped behind me. His size alone shifted the atmosphere. The man's eyes flicked from me to him, calculating something I didn't want to understand. I told him again he wasn't coming inside, that we would lower the volume, and that I didn't know who he was. He gave this strange smile, not warm, not human in any comforting sense, more like a mask someone puts on to hide irritation. Then he said he'd check back later, turned, and walked down the steps. I closed the door, locked it, and Colin asked what the hell that was. I told him I didn't know, but the unease growing in my chest wasn't going away. When I looked out the front window, expecting to see the man leaving, he wasn't gone. He was standing at the end of my driveway, motionless, staring at the house. Frank stepped beside me and whispered that he had never seen the guy on our street. We watched him for 10 minutes, 10 long, heavy minutes. Finally, he turned and walked down the sidewalk, disappearing around the bend where the streetlight didn't reach. Colin suggested calling the police. I hesitated. What would I even say? A guy knocked on my door and then stood in my driveway. It sounded paranoid, even though paranoia was slowly becoming the only thing that made sense. Whitney told us to lock every door and window, so we did. I went room to room, checking latches, checking blinds. When I reached the back bedroom, I looked into the yard. Nothing but shadows and the line of my fence. I told myself it was over, that he was gone, but none of us really believed that. The mood was dead. The music felt intrusive now, too loud even at a whisper. Frank kept glancing at the window. Whitney was on her phone, her hands shaking a little. Colin sat stiffly, jaw clenched. Midnight passed without any of us noticing. I only realized we missed it when my phone lit up with messages from relatives. The beginning of a new year, and instead of cheering, all we felt was dread. Around 12,040, Colin said he needed some air and stepped toward the back door. I followed him, mostly because I didn't want him out there alone. We stood on the patio, listening to distant fireworks. The air was cold enough to sting, but still easier to breathe than the tension inside the house. Colin asked if I recognized the man. I said no, and then stopped, because Colin suddenly froze mid-sentence. He was staring past me, toward the fence. I turned. The man was standing on the other side of it, motionless, silent. His dark figure barely visible in the gap between the boards, but unmistakable. He hadn't made a sound walking up. Had he been there the whole time? Colin yanked my arm, pulling me back inside. He locked the door, checked the deadbolt twice. Whitney rushed over, her voice trembling as she asked what happened. Frank stood, fingers tightening around the baseball bat he'd found earlier. I called 911. My hands felt clumsy. I explained everything as clearly as fear allowed. The dispatcher asked if he had threatened us or shown a weapon. I told her no, but he was following us around the property. She said officers were on the way, but they were slammed with New Year's calls. She told us to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and call back if it escalated. It escalated. We turned off the lights so we could see outside more clearly. The house fell into a dim, eerie stillness. I checked the backyard window. The man was gone, which somehow felt even worse. Minutes passed like hours. Every noise twisted our nerves tighter. The refrigerator hum. The house settling. A distant car. Whitney stood pressed against Colin. Frank had the bat raised slightly like he expected someone to rush through the wall. Then, at 1:07 a.m., we heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound along the side of the house, like fingertips dragging across the siding. The sound moved from the front to the back, never speeding up, never slowing down, almost taunting us with how calm it was. Colin and I crept to the bedroom window overlooking the strip of grass beside the house. Nothing. But the scraping continued until it reached the backyard, and then it stopped. Silence swallowed the house. Then came the knocking. 3 calm, patient knocks on the back door. Exactly like before. Whitney whimpered. Frank whispered something under his breath. I crouched low, inching toward the kitchen where I could see the door without being seen. Through the small window at the top of it, a face hovered close, features lost in the dark. But we knew. It was him. He knocked again. And then he spoke. He said he only wanted to talk. That he wasn't going to hurt anyone. That he had been watching the house for a while. And then he said he knew there was a woman inside. The way he said woman. The way he emphasized it. It froze my blood. Colin snapped. He grabbed the bat from Frank and charged the door, slamming his palm against it and yelling that he'd kill the guy if he didn't leave. The face pulled back. Footsteps darted across the patio. Then nothing. I called 911 again, my voice breaking. They told me officers were minutes away. Those minutes dragged endlessly. We huddled in the hallway, afraid to go near any window. Frank whispered that we should have run earlier, but none of us could force ourselves to open a door. When the police arrived around 1032, the man was gone. The officers searched the yard, the sides of the house, even the nearby street. No footprints. No evidence. Nothing to prove he'd ever been there. They took the report, promised extra patrols, and wished us a safer rest of the night. Colin and Whitney left. Frank went home. I stayed awake until sunrise with every light on, gripping the bat, checking the windows over and over. The man never came back. No one else ever saw him. No one recognized the description. It was like he appeared for a single night, chose my house, and vanished. But every New Year's Eve since then, I make sure I'm not home. Because sometimes, even now, I hear those same 3 patient knocks in my head, and I wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door just a little wider. Fireworks had been popping off since midnight, and by the time the last ember drifted over the downtown skyline, my phone showed 1:17 a.m., January 1st. I had turned 24 just a few weeks before Christmas, still adjusting to my new life in Austin after moving for a nursing position at a small clinic in the University District. My roommate, Chloe, had stayed at her boyfriend's place for the holiday, which meant the duplex on Maplewood Lane would be empty when I got back. The party I'd attended was only a mile and a half away, hosted by a coworker named Iris, who had become something close to a friend over the past few months. I could have called a rideshare, probably should have. But the night air felt crisp and clean after hours inside a living room jammed with people. The neighborhood between her place and mine was made up of quiet residential blocks, the kind with hedges trimmed to perfect angles and porch lights left on all night. I figured the walk would take maybe 20 minutes, and plenty of other people would be heading home at the same time. The first 10 minutes proved exactly that. Groups of friends wandered past in glittery outfits, laughing too loudly, carrying half-empty champagne bottles. I passed a couple kissing against a mailbox, an older man walking a golden retriever, a cluster of teenagers taking blurry selfies under someone's extravagant LED yard display. My heels clicked steadily against the pavement, and I kept my purse tucked close out of habit rather than fear. But around the halfway mark, something shifted. The streets grew quieter, the gaps between porch lights longer, the sidewalks emptying until it felt like the whole neighborhood had exhaled and gone still. That was when I heard footsteps behind me, maybe 40 feet back, steady and unhurried. I told myself it meant nothing. It was New Year's. People walked everywhere tonight. Still, I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of someone in dark clothing, hands in their pockets, moving at roughly my pace. A man, maybe, hard to tell. I picked up my speed a little, not running, just walking with more intention, my eyes fixed on the familiar outline of my duplex 3 blocks ahead. By the time I reached my street, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The footsteps had faded, or maybe I had stopped listening over the thumping pulse in my ears. Maplewood Lane looked exactly as it always did. Dark windows, the blue glow of TVs flickering behind curtains, the stillness that always came with late hours in a quiet neighborhood. My unit sat near the end of the cul-de-sac. The porch light was on just as I'd left it, illuminating the ceramic frog Chloe had bought at a flea market. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers clumsy from the cold or something else I didn't want to name. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside, shutting the door and twisting the deadbolt until it felt like it couldn't turn any farther. I stood in the dark entryway for a moment, breathing deeply while the silence settled around me like a heavy blanket. I told myself I'd been ridiculous, paranoid, the kind of person who watched too many true crime documentaries. I dropped my purse on the counter, poured a glass of water, and scrolled my phone while my heartbeat slowed. Chloe had sent a blurry photo of her and her boyfriend kissing at midnight. Iris had posted a story of her guests doing shots and singing off-key to some nostalgic song. Normal things. Harmless things. The world outside my window hadn't changed. Nothing was wrong. A hot shower felt like exactly what I needed. The bathroom sat at the back of the duplex with a frosted window facing a narrow strip of yard filled with those small decorative stones Chloe and I hated because they always got tracked into the kitchen. I didn't bother closing the door since nobody else was home. The water warmed quickly, and the moment I stepped under it, my muscles sank with relief. Steam filled the air. My thoughts loosened. Minutes slipped by, unnoticed. I was rinsing conditioner from my hair when I heard something outside the window. A soft sound, not loud enough to panic me immediately. Fabric brushing against the exterior wall. I shut off the water, stood perfectly still, heart climbing into my throat. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then it came again. A faint scraping, the subtle shift of weight on gravel. Those stones outside the bathroom made a very specific sound when stepped on. And someone was stepping on them now, only a few feet from where I stood, naked and dripping. I didn't scream. Some instinct I didn't know I had told me staying silent was safer. I snatched my towel, wrapping it around myself with shaking hands while keeping my eyes fixed on the frosted glass. I could make out the faint outlines of fence posts and the neighbor's roof, but nothing else. No figure, no shadow. I stood there, breathing unevenly, while water dripped off me into a widening pool on the floor. Then a pale glow appeared at the lower edge of the window. Faint, bluish, a phone screen. It hovered there for a brief, awful moment before vanishing. Someone was standing outside my bathroom window, close enough to touch the glass, and they had just checked their phone or taken a photo. My entire body went cold. I moved to the far wall, pressing myself against it, away from the window. My phone was still in the kitchen. The bathroom door didn't lock. I listened, straining to hear anything beyond my heartbeat. The gravel shifted again. Softer. Then silence. I counted 60 seconds in my head, then 60 more. When I could finally move, I crept out of the bathroom in a crouch, towel clutched tight, every shadow in the hallway looking too tall, too human. I reached the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and immediately called 911. My voice trembled so badly the dispatcher asked me to repeat myself twice. I told her someone was outside my house, that I'd seen a phone light at my window, that I thought someone had followed me home. She asked if I'd seen the person clearly or if they'd tried to get inside. I answered no to both, shaking even harder at how little I could offer. She told me officers were on the way and to stay low, stay quiet, stay away from windows. I crouched behind the kitchen island, cold tile under my legs, listening to the deep silence of the duplex and the faint echo of distant fireworks. 10 minutes passed. 15. It felt like hours. When red and blue light finally swept across the living room curtains, I nearly sobbed with relief. The dispatcher told me officers were approaching the door. Moments later, 2 sharp knocks sounded, followed by a clear announcement. I unlocked the door so fast I nearly tripped. 2 officers stepped inside, a woman with short gray hair, Officer Dunlap, and a younger man who looked barely older than I was. They didn't treat me like I was overreacting, even though I stood there in a towel with wet hair. Officer Dunlap asked me to show her the bathroom while the younger officer checked the yard. I led her there, feeling embarrassed, almost hopeful that nothing would be outside, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But before she even finished sweeping the flashlight beam across the window, her radio crackled. The younger officer's voice sounded tight, urgent. He needed her outside, east side of the property. She told me to lock the door behind her, and I did. From the kitchen window, I watched their flashlights move across the narrow yard. They found footprints in the decorative stones, a clear trail leading from the back corner of the property to directly beneath the bathroom window. The stones there were disturbed in a rough circle, scattered and pressed down like someone had stood there shifting their weight. Officer Dunlap showed me photos on her phone. My stomach dropped. The pattern matched exactly what I had heard. But that wasn't the worst part. The younger officer found a fresh cigarette butt near the fence line, still stained at the filter. And next to it, pressed into the dirt, was a knee print. Someone had been kneeling there, hidden in the shadows, watching the house long enough to smoke the entire cigarette. They asked again what the person behind me on the street looked like. I could barely give them anything. Dark clothes, average height, nothing helpful. The officers stayed almost an hour, checking every lock, taking my statement. Officer Dunlap suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. That suggestion alone told me everything I needed to know about how concerned she really was. I called Chloe. She told me to pack a bag and get to her boyfriend's place immediately. I threw on clothes without checking what I grabbed, stuffing whatever I could into my backpack. The whole time, I kept glancing at the windows, terrified I'd see someone standing there in the darkness. The rideshare arrived in minutes, and I practically bolted out the front door. I stayed with them for 3 nights. We installed motion sensor lights that week, added a lock to the bathroom door, and put a second deadbolt on the back entrance. I started carrying pepper spray. And I never walked home alone after dark again. The police never caught the person. No suspects, no leads. Just footprints, a cigarette, a knee print, and the knowledge that someone had followed me home and watched me from mere feet away. I still live in Austin. I still work at the same clinic, but I moved to a different apartment with security cameras and a doorman. I sleep better now most nights. But whenever I come home late and the street is quiet, some part of me is back on Maplewood Lane, standing in that steam-filled bathroom, watching a pale blue light appear at the bottom of my window, knowing without a doubt that I was not alone. Ars Tarworth Com residential block. Working long com resident worth set foreign com resident saved. My plan for that night was unremarkable. Stay home, watch the fireworks from the upstairs window, maybe drink a beer or 2, and fall asleep a little after midnight. I'd lived on that street long enough to recognize every porch light, every familiar car, every neighbor's habit. That familiarity created a false sense of security, the dangerous kind you don't notice until it cracks. Kids were already running up and down the sidewalks as the evening settled in, shouting and laughing while early fireworks fizzed in the distance. The air smelled faintly like smoke, warm and nostalgic. It felt like one of those nights where absolutely nothing strange could happen. But as the sun dipped and street lights flickered awake, the neighborhood began to shift. Noise rolled in waves, fireworks bursting, music drifting across yards, families calling to each other. I stood in my kitchen around 11, rinsing a glass, when I realized how often headlights were slowing near my house. At first, I wrote it off as people looking for parking or dropping someone off. But the engines lingered longer than necessary, like the drivers were timing something. It wasn't threatening enough to act on, just unsettling in a way I'd pushed aside. Closer to midnight, I went upstairs to my bedroom, the one facing the street, where the view stretched across nearly the entire block. Flashes of red and green light bounced off car windows and rooftops as fireworks started to intensify. People drifted like shadows between yards, drinks in hand, voices blending into one big ambient celebration. Somewhere down the block, someone had a speaker turned up too loud, the bass distorting every time a firework detonated. That was when I noticed something near the side of my house, just a darker patch by the fence where the light didn't behave right. It wasn't a clear shape at first, nothing obvious, just a sense that something solid stood where nothing should be. But when the next explosion lit the street, the darkness was empty again. I convinced myself it was nothing. Midnight hit with a force that felt physical. The fireworks burst so intensely it pushed pressure into my chest. Cheers erupted from every direction. For a moment, the sky glowed like daylight, color pouring across rooftops. I stayed by the window, letting the chaos fill the room, when a sound slipped beneath it all. A dull, metallic scrape from downstairs. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong. Too steady, too intentional. It didn't fit the randomness outside. I froze, listening harder, the celebration drowning almost everything but that quiet wrongness. As the neighborhood finally dipped in volume, just enough for individual sounds to separate, the next noise slid through the silence. A faint click, gentle, deliberate. Like someone testing something instead of forcing it. My heart thudded hard enough to feel in my throat. I stepped into the hallway and eased my bedroom door open, careful not to let the hinge make a sound. From the top of the staircase, I could see the entryway washed in soft, blinking light from the fireworks outside. Everything looked normal, but there was a tension in the air so sharp it dried my mouth instantly. I crept down a few steps, knees soft, breath shallow. That's when I saw it. The front door handle, tilted slightly down, not fully at rest. I checked my locks religiously, sometimes twice, and I knew exactly how that handle should sit. Seeing it shifted even a millimeter made my pulse spike. I stared, listening for anything. The fireworks outside boomed and popped, their echoes rolling through the house like distant thunder. Then, softer than before, I heard fabric brush against wood right by the doorframe. Someone was there. Someone was inches from stepping inside. Every firework flash threw quick shadows across the entryway, and in one of those brief bursts of light, I saw a shape, a shoulder pulling back from the door. Not a full silhouette, just the suggestion of someone standing exactly where they shouldn't be. My body moved before I could think. I backed up fast, my heel tapping the stair rail hard enough to make a soft clink. It was tiny, almost nothing, but the effect was immediate. Inside the house, everything went still, utterly still, like the air had been tightened. I held my breath, frozen halfway on the stairs, terrified that any movement would give me away. Outside, the neighborhood kept celebrating, oblivious. But inside, that silence felt like waiting. Then, slowly, slow enough to make my skin crawl, the front door handle rose back to its resting position. No rush, no fumbling. Controlled. Someone was taking their hand off it carefully, not wanting to leave a trace. A moment later, footsteps retreated across the porch, not running. Not panicked, just steady, light, practiced. Then nothing. I rushed back upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, shutting the door quietly but fast, phone gripped so hard my fingers hurt. I didn't move from that spot for minutes, maybe longer, just staring and listening to the fading fireworks while adrenaline pounded through me. What had been a night of celebration now felt mocking, like the noise outside had covered something that should never have happened. When the neighborhood finally calmed, I didn't sleep at all. Dawn crept through the blinds slow and cold, and only then did I gather enough courage to check the house. The front door had thin, fresh scratches around the lock, shallow enough to miss unless the light hit just right. The fence gate outside was unlatched. Muddy shoe prints led from my yard toward the next house before fading on the sidewalk. A sick realization settled in my stomach. Not only had someone tried my home, but they'd moved on to others. Later that morning, neighbors began drifting outside, voices low, faces uneasy. 3 homes on the block had signs of attempted entry. All of them during the same loudest moments of the night. Whoever did it wasn't sloppy. They had moved methodically, house to house, choosing moments when attention was guaranteed to be elsewhere. It wasn't desperation. It was planning. A couple of neighbors and I walked the block, pointing out scuffed paint, bent window screens, the same thin marks around locks. One house had a window latch slightly crooked like it had been tested. Another had a garage door nudged just enough to check resistance. The daylight made the whole thing feel worse. Not like a near miss, but like a study. Like someone had watched us long enough to know our habits. A patrol car rolled through early afternoon, the officer listening, jotting notes, nodding as we described the timing. He said, almost casually, that nights like New Year's are prime opportunities because people assume danger takes a holiday. Hearing it put so plainly made my chest tighten. After the officers left, the street fell into a heavy quiet. Doors stayed shut. People went inside early. Conversations dropped off. It was the kind of silence that follows something intrusive. That evening, I replayed the night again and again. The lingering headlights, the strange shadows near my fence, the fact that my porch light had burned out days earlier, how I'd brushed off details that now clattered together like puzzle pieces I wished I hadn't noticed. I spent the next days installing cameras, motion lights, reinforced stripe plates, and retraining my habits, checking the perimeter, locking everything twice, treating routine as vigilance instead of comfort. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave back a sliver of control. Nothing else happened on our block after that. No arrests. No explanations. Just a quiet, shared understanding that we had been lucky. New Year's comes every year, and people still cheer, still celebrate with fireworks and music. I do too. But now, when the sky erupts in color and the world looks upward, I keep one ear tuned to the house. Because I learned something that night, noise doesn't just distract. It covers the footsteps you never hear. And sometimes, the only reason nothing worse happens is because the wrong person decides to walk away instead of stepping inside. That night unfolded during a New Year's public celebration downtown. The kind built out of temporary stages, food trucks, countdown screens tied to streetlights, and crowds so dense the pavement vibrated beneath them. I was living a few blocks away back then, sharing a small apartment with 2 friends. The 3 of us juggling busy jobs, late dinners, and that fragile optimism people carry into a new year. We met a couple of friends at the event, nothing wild, just paper cups of cheap drinks, conversations shouted over music that bled through every street, and the easy warmth of believing the night would end exactly the way it was supposed to. When the fireworks exploded overhead and the countdown hit 0, people surged toward the main avenues in a chaotic stream. Instead of fighting through it, we decided to walk back together the long way. The plan was simple: cut through quieter blocks, avoid the crush, get home, crash. I remember feeling relaxed, slightly buzzed, and already imagining the soft warmth of my bed. None of us were in a hurry, and that calm would make what happened next feel even sharper. The moment we turned onto the first side street, the city's tone changed. The music faded into a dull thump swallowed by the buildings. The laughter scattered, growing thin and sporadic, like someone had poked holes in it. Our group naturally tightened, shoes scraping over pavement littered with confetti and crushed cups. The streetlights were spaced farther apart here, each one casting a pool of yellow that felt isolated instead of comforting. Someone joked about how suddenly quiet it was, and another friend laughed too loudly, the sound bouncing strangely off the walls. That was when I saw it. Movement behind us, faintly reflected in a dark storefront window. Shapes, not clear enough to count, moving at a pace that matched ours. I didn't say anything at first. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just people heading home the same way. But as we walked, the awareness clung to me. When I finally looked back, more directly this time, I caught sight of several figures trailing us. Not close. Not clumped together. Just spaced out deliberately, maintaining a measured distance. They didn't talk. They didn't speed up. They didn't slow down. Their presence announced itself through restraint, and that quiet was somehow worse than anything dramatic. When we crossed an intersection and took a sharper turn than necessary, I listened for the change of rhythm behind us. I heard it. The footsteps broke, then aligned again with ours, a heartbeat later delayed, but intentional. Someone in my group whispered my name, asking if I saw them too, and that quiet confirmation snapped the last thread of denial. We weren't imagining it, and we weren't alone anymore in the way we wanted to be. We picked up our pace, not running, but testing. The figures adjusted instantly, matching our speed without hesitation. The lights ahead looked weaker, stretching into a narrow corridor where the buildings grew taller and the shadows compressed. When we veered slightly toward what should have taken us back to a busier road, the figures widened their formation, subtle but unmistakable, guiding us forward instead. That was the moment the pattern clicked into place. This wasn't coincidence or overlapping routes. This was direction. We were being steered. The air between us thickened, our voices fading into a silence charged with panic we were trying to hide. No one said anything about calling for help, and I think we all knew why. Stopping meant turning. Turning meant exposing ourselves. Even our phones stayed dimmed, screens cupped like the glow itself could betray us. I remember the smell of damp concrete and old trash, sharper than it should have been, as if my senses were overcorrecting. The figures stayed just far enough back to avoid full exposure to the light, their faces swallowed by shadow, their outlines dissolving when we tried to focus. That distance felt calculated, a leash held loose on purpose. The streetlights thinned again, one of them flickering like it was deciding whether to stay alive. Someone muttered that this wasn't right and pointed toward a narrow courtyard ahead, a way to cut into a brighter block. As soon as we slowed to angle toward it, the figures shifted again, spreading wider and occupying the edges of the street, not blocking us, not confronting us, just ensuring we stayed on the path they wanted. The message was wordless but absolute. Keep moving forward. My mouth went dry, and every panicked plan I tried to form collapsed before it even finished. They weren't threatening us directly. They didn't need to. Control was coming from certainty, not speed. I tried something small, almost pathetic in hindsight. I dropped my keys. They clattered against the pavement, loud in the quiet. I bent down slowly, pretending to fumble, trying to see if they'd close the distance. They didn't. Instead, they stopped too, every single one of them. Their stillness hit harder than their pursuit. It felt like acknowledgement, like they understood exactly what I was testing and wanted me to know they were paying attention. When I stood again and resumed walking, they followed. Footsteps syncing with ours so perfectly it felt like the street had learned how to breathe behind us. We approached a stretch with long blank walls, no windows, no doors at eye level. Our shadows warped strangely across the flat surfaces, elongated by the failing lights. My pulse was hammering so hard it felt visible through my jacket. One of my friends whispered that we needed people, light, anything, and pointed toward a narrow passage between two buildings. It wasn't ideal, but it was unpredictable, and unpredictability suddenly felt like safety. Without warning each other aloud, we turned into it as one. For a moment, the footsteps behind us stopped. That moment carved its own terror into the air. It meant they were deciding. The passage felt tighter than it looked from outside, brick walls rising sharply around us and trapping every sound. Our footsteps echoed back, distorted and overlapping, making it hard to tell what belonged to us and what didn't. Halfway through, I realized the silence behind us hadn't lasted. Footsteps returned, but closer now. Unhidden. Their pace no longer careful. They had committed to the turn. Panic sharpened into something colder, a clarity that pushed our bodies forward faster than our thoughts could keep up. Someone in our group was crying softly, trying to contain it, the sound trembling like it could split open the air at any second. The passage spilled out onto a small service road lit by a single buzzing street lamp. Under that harsh glow, the figures emerged just enough for clearer shapes. 4, maybe 5. Layers of dark clothing, nothing individually distinctive. Their faces stayed dipped at angles that kept them partially hidden, but their focus was unmistakable, locked entirely on us. One raised a hand, not pointing, not waving, just lifting it slightly, and the others adjusted position in response. That single gesture froze the air in my lungs. We moved, this time nearly running. The service road sloped upward toward a block I recognized, where residential buildings lined the sidewalk and a convenience store glowed faintly at the far corner. The figures followed, faster now, closing the distance with a quiet urgency that stripped away whatever illusion of patience they had maintained earlier. The rhythm of their steps grew louder, more honest. No more restraint. When the store's bright windows came fully into view, we didn't discuss a plan. We sprinted. All four of us, breath tearing at our throats, shoes slapping hard against the pavement. Behind us, the footsteps surged too, no longer pretending to match pace. They were chasing. We burst into the wash of fluorescent light spilling from the store's entrance, nearly colliding with a couple standing outside. The figures halted just short of the glow, their outlines recoiling instinctively, as if the light drew a hard boundary they refused to cross. They didn't scatter. They didn't speak. They simply melted backward into the darker streets, dissolving as if they had never fully belonged to the visible world to begin with. We stayed there far longer than necessary, trembling, trying to explain ourselves in fragments to the confused couple who had no idea how close we felt to breaking. Eventually, we walked home using only the brightest, loudest roads, clinging to noise and light like lifelines. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't reached that store. But I do know this: they weren't lost. They weren't drunk. And they weren't curious. They knew exactly where they wanted us to go. And that's the part that still keeps me awake some nights.